Here's a quote from your and John Leake's new book about vaccines. Since the first public inoculation campaign in Boston in 1721, so that's more than 300 years ago now, mass vaccination has not been constrained by a rigorous scientific method. On the contrary, it's been mostly a matter of guesses, gambles, and wild experimentation. Many of its most passionate advocates were animated by religious fervor, wishful thinking, ideology, a desire for professional and social prestige, and money, lots of it. So that's the end of the quote. And, when I read that, I thought, it sounds like not that much has changed since that first inoculation attempt in Boston in 1721.
It's so true. Dr. Peter McCullough here in Dallas, Texas, says, honored to be a co-author on this book, Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality, with best-selling historian John Leake. And we pick up the story in 1721 with Cotton Mather, who is a Puritan minister, and he's working with Dr. Boylston, and they're doing what's called variolation. They're trying to take a little bit of pus out of one smallpox pustule in a child and then inject it in another one. A pretty risky proposition, given the fact that once smallpox sets in, it can be pretty serious. And so Mather was so taken up with this that he proclaimed the process itself was a gift from God. This is from the very beginning. We found some examples in Africa where things have been tried, and in Turkey, Constantinople. But Mather declares its religious-like nature of this variolation. And in fact, he's known for something else. You'll be shocked to hear this. He was an advisor to the judges in the Salem witchcraft trials. So Cotton Mather also believed in witchcraft. And that's how this whole thing gets going. And you have to read it because, and I'm sure you have, and your listeners will need to read it because it's just, history is mind-blowing. When we learn towards the end of the 19th century that people in Boston were being put in jail if they did not take a smallpox vaccine, which was not purified, it wasn't sterilized, it wasn't in any way manufactured to be safe in humans, they were put in jail if they didn't take it. Now you fast forward 300 years and people were, lost their jobs, lost their careers, their businesses over not taking a COVID vaccine.
Right. And, you just said that the word inoculate meant that you would gather fluid from a smallpox pustule or a cowpox pustule, and then you would transfer this to a healthy person. You would cut the person's skin, and then you rub this fluid into the skin. Now, if I imagine I had lived in the early 1800s, and somebody would have told me, oh, we have this new idea about, cutting your skin and putting some fluid in there that we took from, let's say, a smallpox pustule, I would have been, honestly, I think I would have been shocked. I mean, I would have said, well, wait a minute. When you're going to do that, aren't you going to infect me with smallpox? So why would I want you to do that? And then they would say, oh, no. So what would they say to you if I would raise that objection?
Remember back then, they didn't know it's a viral infection. So a lot of this history is they don't know the causative agent. I thought maybe it was filth, or at least to call it horse grease. Maybe it came from the kind of secretions in between horses' hoofs. They didn't know the causative agent. They really didn't know how it was spread. So it was a wild guess to take a little bit from somebody and put it in another person. That's called variolation. Now, vaccination really came in with Edward Jenner towards the end of the 18th century, about 50 years later, where he takes material from cowpox and then actually tries to vaccinate a child. And again, it's there's no confirmation that it ever worked. We don't know if they were ever challenged with smallpox. And then there were these claims of it works. So even Edward Jenner's original experiment, he was part of the Royal Society. He submits it to the Royal Society, his pamphlet. They reject it. They said, no, you haven't proved anything. So he literally just kind of publishes this on his own and said, listen, I did this. And then, things get refined over time and this starts to take hold. But it's a very interesting story.
It really is. The book is fascinating, especially, the history of it, the 18th century, the 19th century, but also the 20th century. And we could talk for hours about it. There's so much interesting information about it, and it really comes to life. So I would love to talk about all these different things, but we don't have time. So I want to concentrate on a few things. And you just brought up the English physician Edward Jenner. And he, as you just said, he had this hypothesis that infecting people with this cowpox that milkmaids would get would protect them from getting smallpox. And how did he even come up with this idea? I guess it was because milkmaids, they would get this cowpox from, I think, the udder of the cows when they were milking the cows, or at least that was the idea. And so some of these milkmaids claim that, they wouldn't get smallpox afterwards. And they thought, well, maybe it was because they had cowpox, because it kind of looked similar, but people didn't die from it. But it was just, an idea. And plus, there were also milkmaids that did die of smallpox after they had cowpox. But my question to you is, how can inoculation with cowpox, or let's say horsepox, I think, or a horsepox strain, work to prevent a different disease? I mean, smallpox is a different disease. Because for a vaccine to work, doesn't it have to exactly match the strain that causes the infection?
No, they just have to be related enough. So it turns out cowpox is related enough. It's interesting, even smallpox is related enough to monkeypox. So when we had this monkeypox outbreak in the last few years, those who took the smallpox vaccine, like I took it when I was a kid, I would be protected against monkeypox. But the interesting thing is the reason why smallpox was such a big deal for the milkmaids, the nursemaids, is that if a woman got smallpox, it tended to kind of cause a scarring on the face. And women were greatly alarmed about the risks of smallpox because it could affect facial beauty. And so you may have even heard stories about the milkmaids being particularly beautiful because they were free of these pock marks on the face. So there was a tremendous interest in trying to get protection against smallpox, and it would sweep through. Benjamin Franklin was originally critical of Cotton Mather and Dr. Boylston, and he was writing these kind of sarcastic reviews of what they were doing. And then sure enough, he loses little Frankie to smallpox, his son, and he changes on a dime, and he becomes a proponent of that variolation, that first procedure. Edward Jenner, he's at the right hand of the king. There's money involved. And then King George III and his wife, who had 15 kids, they actually lose 2 children due to Jenner's smallpox vaccine, which can be contaminated with staph and strep and other. And so they still promoted the vaccine for the people of England. And you have to wonder what was going through their mind. Maybe they thought that the vaccine saved 13 kids, and so losing 2 kids was not a bad proposition. You can't imagine how absolutely wild the field of vaccination was 300 years ago.
Yes. And, I think the reason for that, it's actually not that hard to understand, because smallpox, for example, was a terrible disease and people didn't know how to treat it. There was no effective treatment for it. So people were completely helpless. And in a situation like that, you look for, new ideas, new solutions, and even something that might strike you as, well, maybe it's more like a myth, or maybe it's not really proven in any way, but still it's some sort of hope that you might cling on to. So I don't find that so hard to understand back in the, let's say, early 18th century, or maybe even back in the early 18th century. But the interesting thing is, it's now 300 years later, and things have totally changed. I mean, we have effective treatments for most infectious diseases. So the equation looks fundamentally different. And also, many diseases have become way milder. For example, smallpox has become way milder. Measles as well, pertussis too. And so the really strange thing that I want to ask you about is, why is it that the fundamentally changed treatment landscape has not affected the vaccination landscape? Because we vaccinate more and more. We vaccinate earlier, more aggressively than ever. We combine the vaccines. It's like we are still stuck in the 18th and 19th century when it comes to vaccination. And these diseases that we are preventing, that we are trying to prevent, they don't really pose any danger to the vast majority of the population.
Well, a couple observations. One is the mortality from virtually every infectious disease had dropped by 95% before the vaccines came into existence, widespread, the modern era of vaccination, smallpox included. So what made smallpox go away if people didn't take the vaccine? Well, it's because it was learned that it was spread from child to child, sharing bed sheets and linens, and just simple hygiene reduced the spread of smallpox greatly, dramatically. And, the same was true for diphtheria and tetanus and even polio. Polio mortality was plummeting even before the first polio vaccine came into being. And this is largely, again, because of improved air, food, water. Polio is carried in the water supply. The inoculum was reduced in terms of how much organism patients actually got exposed to. But what happened over time is the vaccines were considered like a talisman, like a good luck charm. So if you took one, it's kind of good luck. It's here, take a shot when you're a child and you're good for life. Well, no one could know if you took a shot at 2 years old, would that protect you from a disease at age 90? No one could know. It's simply taken on faith that that would work. And so,
Yes.
as these diseases went away, there were a few natural experiments. One was in Sweden, where they actually went 17 years without a pertussis vaccine. There was a change out between the cellular and acellular pertussis vaccine. 17 years with no pertussis vaccine in Sweden. Guess what? No outbreaks of pertussis, no rebound in pertussis. We've had people in the United States for years, the Amish, Mennonites, and others. And they don't have outbreaks of diphtheria or tetanus or pertussis or polio. We hear every so often about measles, that there's a measles outbreak, but our CDC won't level with us. They always say in the measles outbreak, 95% are unvaccinated or vaccine status unknown. Now that's not acceptable. So I presume if people can't find their vaccine card, then the CDC is counting them as unknown, which is not fair. If they've said, listen, they took the shots, they should be counting them as vaccinated. So the CDC is not playing fair with the data. But let's say 1,200 measles cases this year. There's been a few deaths due to inadequate treatment, not because of the measles itself. They didn't get the right antibiotics and steroids. But worldwide, some years, there's 600,000 measles cases. 600,000. So, 1,200 in the United States, the media is not leveling with America about, is this a big problem or not? Because, they simply are not, just doing a few clicks on a search engine to get the WHO measles data.
Yes. And, you have to look at I think you have to look at not just the cases of measles, and there aren't that many in the United States anyway, but you have to look at you have to compare the risks from the measles infectious disease to the risks of the MMR vaccine, right? You have to do a real risk benefit analysis, and that has never been done.
It hasn't. And, the great concern, and we spend time with it in our book, is that the vaccines have piled up on the children to such a degree where it went from just a few vaccines when you and I were children. We had rates of autism of 1 in 10,000 when we were children. Food allergies were very rare. Allergic diseases were rare. Now, autism is 1 in 31, or 3.2% of the U.S. population. Heavily vaccinated California, it's 5.2% of the population. And autism is
Yeah.
a severe illness. 27% of cases are, IQ less than 55, can't verbally communicate, head banging, screaming, and unable to use the toilet, diapers. And this is for the rest of their lives. So we have over
Correct.
1% of California children like this. I mean, this is an existential threat to, Western societies. And there is, a concordant rise in other neuropsychiatric disorders like attention deficit disorder, which is now 11% of children, seizures, tics. So it's not just autism. Allergic diseases like asthma, allergic dermatitis, food allergies, peanut allergies. I had peanut allergies when I was a kid. Now they're so severe, you can't even bring peanuts into an elementary school. So something's
Yeah.
going on with the children. That's clear. It's not a matter of increased recognition because there's no increase in autism in adults. It's not like people our age suddenly get a diagnosed autism. So this in the children, the vaccines have piled up in the children to a tremendous extent. And now there's entire literature evolving. And we highlight in our book a case in the early 90s. His name is Dr. Poling. And his daughter was 19 months. And she gets a big battery of vaccines. And he's a neurologist. And he watches her, sickness afterwards, high fever, rash, and then she converts to autism right in front of his very eyes. He publishes the case report. And Poling is in the omnibus group of claimants who've come forward and said, listen, it looks like the MMR and these other vaccines are triggering autism. And what the federal government does is they pull his case out, they settle with him, and then they declare the other 5,000 cases not related to the vaccines. His name is Jonathan Poling. He used to be a professor at Johns Hopkins. Now he's in practice in Athens, Georgia. I mean, you have to read this. We now have this growing body of evidence. There's about a half dozen studies showing it. Nowadays, if kids take no vaccines, they're healthier. They have much lower rates of these neuropsychiatric and allergic diseases.
This case that you just mentioned with Hannah Poling. When I read about that in the book, I was really shocked how many shots she got before she became autistic, because she had been sick.
Mm-hmm.
She had ear infections, so they skipped several of these vaccines. And then when she finally was well, they decided, oh, well, we are going to catch up and we are going to give you all these shots that you missed in one go. Absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, crazy thing to do. And then, well, as you just said, she became autistic. And this profound autism is absolutely devastating. I mean, not just for the parents, it's really for the whole family, for the friends, because the siblings are affected, the grandparents, the whole family. And there's no hope that it's going to get, really better. It's something that has changed in the child. Also, another thing, the SIDS deaths, the silent, sudden infant deaths, they are also apparently connected with these febrile seizures that are caused by the vaccines. And since we're about the same age, I mean, when I was young, I didn't know a single person who was autistic. I'm not even sure I knew what the word meant.
Right.
I didn't know a single person who had a peanut allergy or any allergy. I can't remember. I must have been, I don't know, maybe I was in my 20s when I started meeting people who had allergies. I don't remember any. I don't even remember I don't even know what the expression "SID" is in German. I don't think that existed. There was no acronym to describe this. Babies didn't just die or had to be put in some special position. I never ever heard any of these things.
No, you're right. A paper by Neil Miller showed the vast majority of sudden infant death cases occur within a few days of taking a big battery of the vaccines. And
so, right. So since we know this, how is it even possible? That is I think that is it's absolutely criminal. We know this, right?
Well, yeah, the data are clear. And, Burl Hamady, who's a state representative in Louisiana, she pushed forward legislation to in a sense, force the coroners, the medical examiners, to review the vaccine record at the time the babies have their autopsies, which they have to have. And do you know the coroners refused to do it? They pushed to not have any legislation. They didn't want to look at the vaccine record at all. So
Wow.
it's willful blindness. And the CDC says on their website, 3 to 4% of babies per year are going to have a febrile seizure. The temperature goes to 104, they start convulsing. Now, that's 3 to 4% of kids per year. The leading cause is getting a big battery of vaccines, but it can happen with a viral or bacterial infection. And then a paper by Nielsen and colleagues, very important paper from Sweden, has demonstrated that a febrile seizure at any time during childhood is related to about a 40% risk of developing one of those neuropsychiatric disorders.
Wow. When I listen to these numbers, I'm amazed that there are any kids left that, maybe there aren't any kids left who don't have some sort of effect or somehow damaged by the vaccines, because 3 to 4%, that is per vaccination, right?
No, that's actually per year. 3 to 4% per year have a febrile seizure. Our CDC has published that the vaccines provoke febrile seizures. And then, cases like polling, and there's so many well-documented cases where the children are born normal. Children are not born with autism. Mm-hmm. Something happens relatively acutely, and they convert to autism typically before the age of 9.
Okay, so it's 3 to 4% per year, but they are being vaccinated from day one on, day one, the day they are born, which is crazy, until, let's say 18, when they become, adults. So that's 18 years. So you have 18 times 3 to 4% chance of having a febrile seizure, according to that. And then if the child does have a febrile seizure, and maybe they're more common when they're young, I don't know.
Right.
And then, so then it's not 18, then it would be, I don't know, maybe more like 4 or 5. But even that, because if you do have one of these febrile seizures, the chance of that damaging the child is 40%. That's a very high chance.
Right. Well, listen to this. These neuropsychiatric disorders in the Nielsen paper include attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. The CDC says that's 11% of the childhood population. Autism spectrum disorder, that's 3.2% of the childhood vaccination population. Tics and epilepsy, that's probably 1%. It kind of fits. Honestly, it's pretty close to that roundabout estimation. And then you add in the asthma, the food allergies, and Robert F. Kennedy says about half the children have some problem right now. And the question on the table is, could some of this be related to excessive vaccination?
Yes. Now, you write in the book, and I'm going to quote, "The causes of sickness and health, both in individuals and in large populations, are immeasurably more complex and multifactorial than most other objects of scientific analysis." So what does that mean with regard to scientific analysis? How should scientific analysis be done when we are dealing with such a complex entity as the human body?
Right. So people have compared the airplane to the human body. Well, I can tell you the airplane is a tiny fraction of the complexity of the human body. And so when we look at what's called the hard sciences, physics, engineering, mathematics, they rely on deductive thinking, and they rely on laws, the laws of gravity, the laws of physics. When we talk about the human body, we're making observations. There's a few laws that we've identified, acid-base laws, and there's a few laws of involve movement and things like this. But largely, we're talking about inferential thinking. And inferential thinking means we never know the truth we just constantly study it, and we approximate the truth. We try to approximate the truth, and that's what makes it so difficult. People say, well, what's the cause of autism? I'm an epidemiologist. I can tell you, I don't think there's a single cause. We were able to identify a case of autism before the vaccines, and it was pretty well documented. So vaccines, like other risk factors, like older parents and premature delivery, some common genetic variants, they must act as risk factors. And they're playing a role in the genesis of autism. It's just like heart blockages. Cholesterol is a risk factor. Smoking is a risk factor. Diabetes, high blood pressure. But there's no single cause of coronary atherosclerosis. I don't think there's going to be a single cause of autism. I don't think it's a single vaccine or some ingredients in the vaccine. It looks like, just in the case of Hannah Pulling, it's a compound effect of giving multiple vaccines, having a reaction, and the inflammatory factors are called cytokines. They go into the brain in this setting, and they cause brain damage.
So one of the things in your book that I found extraordinarily interesting is the whole swine flu affair in 1976, because, and I didn't know that, and I bet many people don't, because that was the first time that Congress granted a liability shield for that swine flu shot to some pharmaceutical companies. So, yeah, talk about that. How did that happen?
Well, swine flu, 1976, the one thing I didn't know is I didn't know that there was no swine flu problem. I really thought that there was a swine flu epidemic. There wasn't. There was just, a few researchers in Fort Detrick, Maryland, who thought that a flu strain could come that would be a serious strain. They thought this could occur, but it actually never happened. It was like a weather forecast that didn't come true. And so what happens is they convince the Ford administration to mass vaccinate the entire country. And so about a quarter of the population is vaccinated, and we start to see a terrible complication called Guillain-Barre syndrome, which is an ascending paralysis. Some people on the ventilator, some people dying. About 500 cases of Guillain-Barre, 25 kind of gruesome deaths. And, no healthy person should ever die after taking an elective vaccine. It's an unacceptable, death after vaccination is an unacceptable side effect. It is. And with no Twitter, no social media, no YouTube, no VAERS database, just good old common sense. And the Ford administration said, shut this down. It's not safe. Mm-hmm. So, it's another example of how this mass vaccination field has really had its missteps. Now, in general, the vaccines each start out relatively unsafe, and they get refined over time. And the final ones that are used are reasonably safe. Like the smallpox vaccine I got was far different than what Edward Jenner tried years ago, and I think infinitely safer. The polio vaccine that I took as a child, I think, was infinitely safer, although, my mom took me in multiple times, originally for the oral polio vaccines and then later on the injectable. So the later vaccines are refined and they get safer. But what happens each time is the human population gets experimented upon.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and to come back to this liability shield, because you already talked about the deaths that occurred and the Guillain-Barre incidences that occurred after this mass vaccination. I think they stopped the mass vaccination after 49 million Americans had been injected because of the side effects. But they stopped it, in contrast to the COVID shots. But what was interesting is that the pharmaceutical companies, I think it was like Merck and some others, Merrill, Wyeth, and somebody else, they said, well, we are not willing to do this because it's just so risky. We're not going to do this. I mean, would be great business for us, but you know what? We're not going to do it unless you, Congress, are going to give us complete freedom from liability. Then we'll do it happily. And that's And that's what Congress did. So the fact that the manufacturers of this vaccine, they must have, they manufactured the thing. You would think that they would have some sort of insight into the risks of it, that they said, we are not willing to do it. And then Congress said, okay. And they asked for a liability shield. Actually, they had someone in the CDC to do the bidding for them. There was someone in the CDC who said, well, we should really give these pharma companies liability. Which, this is 50 years ago, but you can see the influence, the lobbying influence, the influence that the pharmaceutical companies had, or Big Pharma had back then, very well. So, and then Congress gave it to them. But they gave it to them only for this one specific swine flu shot, 1976. And, I think tasting this delicious fruit of complete freedom from liability for these very dangerous shots that resulted in many deaths and many terrible illnesses, that must have given the pharmaceutical company the idea of, well, we would like to have that for every single shot, for every single vaccine, not just for the swine flu. We want to have it for, and it took them 10 years until 1986 when the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act was passed by Congress. Isn't that fascinating? They had 10 years and they worked their wonders.
Well, I tell you, if you're a product manufacturer, to be free of liability. I mean, I'm a doctor. I just finished with a patient right before I came on your show. I'm not free of liability. I mean, everything I do, I am very liable for that patient's life. Now, I'm going to send her for some testing. That testing facility is not free of liability. I'm going to prescribe some drugs for her, which I did. The drug manufacturers are not free of liability. So people should be asking, why are vaccine manufacturers in the United States free of liability? This is something that is greatly concerning. And this vaccine injury compensation doesn't really work. People don't get compensated. These cases get thrown out. The government, with the polling case, was just really underhanded, offered him a settlement, and then kicked his case out because they know it was so well documented. It was clear the vaccines essentially ruined his daughter, Hannah. So we have a situation now where parents feel very uncomfortable because vaccines now have become requirements or even mandated for schools, military, university, employment. This has gotten tougher and tougher to go. Let me give you an example. I was on staff at hospitals for years. And, every year, it got more and more strict where I had to take a flu shot to remain on staff. And I remember it got to the point and said, listen, we're kicking you off staff. We're locking you out of the hospital unless you take a flu shot. And so I remember, end of the year, I'd be scrambling to get a flu shot. Do you know every flu shot that I took, in the package insert, there's a boxed warning for a side effect, Guillain-Barre syndrome. Every time I took a flu shot, I risked lifelong paralysis. Now, let me tell you, my chances of getting flu in any given year is way less than 1%. There's 4 FDA-approved drugs for influenza. I'm healthy and I'm strong, so I have a 0 risk of serious influenza. Why would I take any risk with Guillain-Barre syndrome? And sure enough, I put this in my book. My brother, who is here in Dallas, he had a colleague, and they worked for business. He took a flu shot, and sure enough, he got Guillain-Barre syndrome, and he's bedridden the rest of his life because of a flu shot. Flu shots are barely effective. And in fact, the studies show if you take the flu shot every year, you're more likely to get the common cold. And that was what's happening with me. That was shown in randomized trials. So I finally stopped taking these flu shots. But, there's a great irony. Recently, Robert F. Kennedy and the ACIP panel just removed the final thiomersal, or mercury-containing vaccines, which is 4% of the flu shots, off the market. And one of them was Fluzone. Guess what? The last flu shot I got was a mercury-containing flu shot.
Oh, wow. you just mentioned that the package insert actually for the flu shot actually warns. There's a warning on it saying that it can cause the syndrome,
GPS, yeah.
GPS. And the thing is, you never get to see the package insert. I guess you have to ask. I didn't know. I mean, I wish I would have asked to show me the package insert, and then you need to sit in the waiting room for an hour to study it. But you're not even, nobody shows you. The pediatricians don't show you the package insert. They say, hey, you should look at this. There's nothing like informed consent at all.
No.
And
yeah, let me give you one quick example. Vaccination has crept into pregnancy. Never used to vaccinate pregnant women because pregnant women should be natural, and you don't want to cause a fever. Anything that causes a fever in a pregnant woman can cause the woman to lose the baby. That's a miscarriage or a stillbirth or a premature delivery. Well, if you open up the package insert for the RSV vaccine, which is a new vaccine for pregnant women, guess what it says? Can cause premature birth. So these poor women having premature babies in the NICU, and the babies have intraventricular hemorrhages and pulmonary problems and eye problems. Some of that's avoidable by just not taking vaccines during pregnancy.
Exactly. And another point that you made that I thought was really good, you said a little bit earlier, that when you go to a doctor like yourself, you are not free of liability. Of course you are not. Neither is, the lab or anybody else who does a test with you, nor are the drug manufacturers that produce drugs that are not vaccines. All these are not free from liability. And I'm just wondering, if you would ask people, are you willing to go to a doctor that is free of liability for what he or she does to you, how he or she treats you? Would anybody do that? Probably, would be maybe some freak, but I mean, 99.9% of the population would not do that ever. But what's interesting is that if it's a vaccine, there's a liability shield. It's pretty much the same situation. And people do go and get vaccinated because I think a lot of people don't even know.
Yeah.
They're not even aware.
And so that's the reason why your show's so important. We're going to have to leave it here, but people getting educated and doing their own research helps. Our book, Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality, I think goes a long way in taking this historical perspective and having people understand what's occurred. All the doctors and nurses really want to get this. They want to get the history straight on this. It's meticulously referenced. It's well written. It reads fast, and you can start to challenge yourself. Who was more arrogant, Louis Pasteur or Anthony Fauci? I'll let you decide.
That's true.
I got to go. Thank you so much. We'll leave it open.
Thank you very much, Dr. McCullough.
Okay. Bye-bye.